Variations in exercise help to prevent injury, mimic the range of motion for a specific sport or activity, help to restore lost motor patterns, allow for modifications to match an individual's genomics, are necessary for training to be personal.
Welcome back, it's Alan with The Human Conditioned. In the previous video, I talked about training from a personal as compared to a personalized standpoint. I mentioned training as it relates to performance, rehabilitation, and prehabilitation. Prehabilitation being training specifically designed to prepare an individual for a medical procedure and shorten recovery time. The third area I mentioned was training from the standpoint of corrective maintenance, particularly as it relates to a known diagnosed medical condition. Today I am going to expand on two of those, performance and rehabilitation, and some considerations to make training personal. Personalized training is based on the individual's goals, activities, and history. It looks at the current state of the individual and whether their focus of activity needs to move beyond performance due to medical concerns or a past situation that would indicate modifications in their exercise program. Modifications are made based on specific situations of each individual and include consultation with medical professionals where indicated. From the standpoint of performance, I believe that we are all athletes and that our Olympic event is our life, and we should be able to perform that event to the maximum of our ability as long as we breathe. Some people perform their Olympic event as a weekend warrior, some as part of their job. Some perform their Olympic event sitting at a desk, which would involve specific exercises to counterbalance the inherent risks associated with the desk job. Injury prevention is critical to ongoing and progressive training. Previously, I talked about biomechanical considerations such as variations in the lunge. I talked about physical considerations and that the mechanism of injury is also the mechanism of injury prevention, which was illustrated by the eccentric calf drop. Physiological considerations, including proprioceptive feedback, the nervous system, and reflex arcs. Today, I am going to introduce hypoxic training and some exercise variations specific to individual sports. Variation may be in resistance, repetitions, rate of performance, range of motion, or a combination of all of these. Personalized training programs are focused on an individual's why, the reason they do what they do, and how they can do it more efficiently and effectively. From the standpoint of performance, today I am going to introduce you to Sierra. Sierra messaged me as she had an item on her bucket list of completing a half marathon. For those of you not familiar with this event, that's 13.1 miles. She asked me, in your professional opinion, would it be possible to train to run a half marathon in 10 weeks? My question, how much have you been running and which half marathon? She responded minimal, and she wanted to do the other half in Moab, Utah. My suggestion was that she run and see how far she could go comfortably. Based on the first run of 1.8 miles and taking into consideration her own history, her known response to exercise, her body awareness, the presentation of delayed onset muscle soreness, also known as DOMS, and the known effectiveness and clarity of her communication with me as a trainer, and the completeness of that communication in relaying her training experience to me, I determined that this was doable without putting her at risk. Let's hear from Sierra.
My name is Sierra Goldie, and about 11 weeks ago I decided I wanted to run a half marathon. Pretty much was doing zero cardio, so kind of call it my couch to running training program that Alan put me through. My first run I was running about 16-minute miles, so pretty slow. Pretty hard, didn't feel great, but in 11 weeks he progressed me to finishing a half marathon, cutting about 6 minutes off my pace. And after that, I did training that helped with hypoxic training, helped me breathe great, and really just improves training, and that's something I would not have known without Alan. And he also helped me train to strengthen my anterior muscles on my shins so I didn't get shin splints, and all that combined made me finish a half marathon and achieve a big bucket list goal for myself, so it was awesome.
One of the training techniques Sierra mentioned is hypoxic training. Hypoxic training is aimed at improving human performance and well-being by way of adaptation to reduced oxygen. I have found hypoxic training to be very effective in supporting individuals training for an endurance event under constraints of time. In this case, we did measured intervals where Sierra would do breath holding, thereby reducing the amount of available oxygen for muscles under stress. There are also some specific exercises which we employed to improve performance and reduce injury potential. As I mentioned in the first video, the same exercise may be modified based on the goal activity of the individual. The same muscle may be strengthened at different angles depending on the goal activity of the individual. Let's look at a few of these. Sierra also mentioned strengthening the tibialis anterior, which is the muscle at the front of the lower leg, to reduce the incidence of and prevent shin splints. To do this, I'm going to provide a resistance on the toe and contract that toe towards the knee as far as I can. Another way to do this is to lay flat on the floor with the toes underneath, for instance, the front of a couch or chair, and lift that up off the floor by again raising the toe toward the knee. When I first observed Sierra running, there was no extraneous motion, particularly up and down, which is often something that comes from doing a bunch of squats or resistance that is vertical, which causes runners to have that bounce in their run. And a zigzag up and down is just as much a waste of energy as a zigzag from side to side. The one thing that was evident is there wasn't a lot of connection between her upper body and lower body, as far as her upper body providing support for her lower body, which is where she needed to get the power for her run. So one of the exercises that we included was a deadlift into a scapular retraction. This is the exercise. Grasping the kettlebells, keeping a neutral spine, stand up, rotate into the scapula. Going back down, just letting the kettlebells, the arms relax, standing up again, and rotating outward, retracting the scapula. This is an excellent exercise for runners, helping them to get that connection between the upper body and the lower body and getting the drive into the back, as opposed to a rotational movement of the arms, which you will often see with runners. It gives them more of that linear pull, which transfers into a forward drive. Another excellent exercise for runners is the Swiss ball hamstring curl. Lying flat on my back with my palms facing up. I'm going to raise my hips off the ground, and I'm going to curl into my hamstrings and extend, and curl and extend. As I do this, I want to stay as straight as I can through the hips so that I'm getting that maximum extension, which will be the backward drive for the run. In order to intensify this and require more rotational stability, I can bring my arms together and point them towards the ceiling. As I curl in and go back out, now I have to add that extra element of balance in order to keep from going off center. The hip bridge is an excellent exercise for runners. I lay flat on my back with my knees bent. I'm going to hold the weight so that it doesn't roll down my body. I'm going to keep the weight into my heels, which takes the workload out of my hamstrings and leaves it into the glutes. I'm going to extend as far up as I can and come back down. Again, this is to get that glute strengthened at its maximal contraction, which is much more effective for runners than, say, for instance, a squat, which is good for someone who needs vertical. When I take the weight off, I don't want to lift it and twist my back. I want to just roll to the side. Now let's talk about rehabilitation and prehabilitation. Most of us have had some type of injury or illness that sets us back from our daily routine. In the case of injury, there are some incidences where rest will take care of the situation, particularly if it is related to overuse. When there is structural damage, further intervention in the form of strengthening and possibly reprogramming motor patterns is often indicated. Prior to beginning this type of program, it's important to understand the mechanism of injury as well as the systems involved and what effect it is having on the individual. I look at the impact on performance of both daily activities and other areas of lifestyle, triggers that may cause a flare-up or increased inflammation or restriction of movement, and the bodily response to movement in the affected area. There may or may not be visible imbalances as a result of the individual favoring the non-injured areas which work along with the area of injury. There may be protective instincts that kick in where the individual is not aware they are modifying their normal movement patterns as a means of protecting the injured area. There may be a lack of response preventing fluidity of motion or a disconnect in the kinetic chain. The kinetic chain being the natural sequence of movement in an optimal movement pattern. Also important is the individual's why or desired end result for addressing the injured area. From the standpoint of rehabilitation, I'm going to introduce you to Andrew, who suffered a shoulder injury which led to repeated subluxation. In other words, a partial dislocation, which generally stems from changes in the mechanical integrity of the joint. Addressing this involved assessing the initial range of motion and function in all planes of movement and what adjustments, both conscious and unconscious, he was making to protect this. We looked at his bodily response to resistance. We did various sequential exercises to help him move past the compensations he was making and the mindset that was leading to protection, strengthening in such a way that the joint again became stable, providing an ongoing maintenance and progressive strengthening program. Let's hear from Andrew.
I'm Andrew, and I have had a shoulder injury for the past couple of years. It's been subluxing every now and then. It has very little range of motion. And then after coming to Allen's for about a month and a half, I have improved range of motion after 2 weeks of being here, and now it's almost back to its full range of motion.
To recap, the end result of a personalized, system-based focus is effective, efficient motor patterns and motor responses to stimulus, which improve performance and decrease or eliminate incidents of injury, and improved quality of life.
No, 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 no.